Welcome home. We are WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive, celebrating 25 years of this madness. And the 25-year Stories of Glory countdown will begin this week. It's finally getting a little bit of our sea legs under us. No London, no baseball, other than if you're somewhere in the state of Texas or elsewhere. Maybe our friends up in Philadelphia can figure that out before the week is over. But we had some football here on Sunday, and we're getting the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road, a full schedule into November, December. Governor Wes Moore has checked in. Mayor Brandon Scott has checked in. Many other folks have checked in. November, December, check the website. It's all brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. We're giving away the Raven Scratch-Off. It's been a pretty lucky batch once I get back out on the road to Costas and Coco's and Pappas and other places. We're going over to State Fair as well later on in the month. Give you a chance to win. Also, our friends and win donation, 866-90-NATION. You buy two, you get two free. 0% financing, 5 years beginning this month. And our friends, of course, the newest friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. My little orange light is off because I had my oil changed, and you can do that at a Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. I'll be telling you more about that. Luke Jones is going to be telling you about a game on Sunday that, dare I say, one for the ages to some degree. Like, we've wondered how good the team can be. I think you and I in the offseason heaped enough praise upon Eric DeCosta and offseason acquisitions and all these number one draft picks in the wide receiver room and how are we going to throw the football. Look, if it looked like that in week one, we all would have stood up and applauded and said, it's fixed, it's perfect, good job all summer. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way on injuries. It doesn't work that way for the Buffalo Bills, for the Kansas City Chiefs, for the Philadelphia Eagles, any of these teams that think they're going to be really good. The Ravens finally went out on Sunday and put the piece of tape down, as I wrote in my column this week, that will quiet things for a while. We now see how good they can be. Now, they need to be that good in January, or kind of sort of that good between here and there. But for one day, for 3 hours, against a quality opponent, a big boy adult quarterback in the league, a veteran quarterback who's been a quarterback in a Super Bowl, and a team that we heaped tons of praise on last week, because everybody else in the NFL was heaping praise on the Detroit Lions. Sunday, coming out party for the Ravens. Kudos. Well done. Well done by the whole organization.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, other than saying it'll quiet everyone for a while, because no, that's not how the NFL works at all. If they're kind of meandering through a sloppy, choppy win against Arizona on Sunday, and I'm not saying they will, but if they do, people will come back out questioning things and all that. But
they probably will, because they don't look, because other than 2019, when it looked like this for about 10 weeks in a row, nobody in the history of the game does this. Goes out 28-0 first quarter. Like that's not realistic, not even against the Browns, you know?
Right. I mean, that's why you never take blowout victories for granted, nor should you really expect them on a week in and week out basis. But everything you said, I agree with, in the sense of, this was very much, as I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, as Roquan Smith alluded to when he was asked about this Detroit Lions team earlier in the week, and was asked if this was a measuring stick game for the Lions, but I think it also applied for the Ravens. He said this is a show me business. And after all the talk of the offseason, as you just pointed out, and all the talk about the Ravens, well, they're 4-2, they should be 6-0. Well, that rings hollow if you don't go out and have the kind of complete performance against a high quality opponent. And I still think the Detroit Lions are a good football team. This isn't going to be, oh, well, the Lions were fraudulent. Now, they were terrible on Sunday. There's no question about that, but the Ravens had a ton to do with that, right? So I think this is a reminder. This is a glimpse at what this team can be. And we acknowledged leading up to this game that it hadn't exactly been a murderer's row of opponents they faced. Even Cincinnati in week 2, while the Bengals seem to be maybe finding their way a little bit over the last couple of weeks, they certainly haven't looked like the team that went to the Super Bowl a couple years ago. So, you can talk about the opposing quarterbacks they'd faced up to this week, all of those different things. Detroit was legitimate across the board. I mean, I can rattle off all the stats once again. They were a top 5 offense. They were playing like a top 5 defense. Jared Goff was playing like a top 5 quarterback going into this game. And the Ravens not only beat the Detroit Lions in every phase of the game, they throttled them. I mean, this was not close from start to finish. I would say the Ravens played a complete 4 quarters, but they didn't even need to do that. It was so bad, so ugly after 3 quarters that John Harbaugh was able to call off the dogs a little bit. and replace Lamar Jackson late in the game, replace some of his best players on either side of the ball to keep them out of harm's way over the last half of the fourth quarter. So really, really impressive in that regard. And yeah, this was what the Ravens had been talking about, what they had been envisioning, what they believed themselves to be as a football team when they're firing on all cylinders. And it was really, really impressive. Now, it's a week-to-week league, and we understand that just because you do it one week doesn't mean that that's it's going to look like week after week after week, and it's not going to be that easy. But boy, they really made it look easy on Sunday, and that was the kind of performance I think everyone was waiting to see, to really look at this team through a different lens of not just a team that has looked like a playoff team, which they had through the first 6 weeks at 4-2, but on Sunday, I think that was the kind of performance that the rest of the league takes notice and says, hey, Baltimore's for real. They're a team to be reckoned with in the AFC.
Luke Jones is here. He will be there all week in Owings Mills as the Ravens prepare for another West Coast trip. And we talk about trips, and we'll get into Arizona later on in the week. And they stunk on Sunday at 4 o'clock because I watched a lot of that game. One thing is, it's been afforded for me. I watch a lot of football these days because I'm on the couch. I'm not in airplanes. I'm not in taxis. I'm not in Ubers. I'm not in rental cars. I'm not in hotel rooms. But they are. And they got 3 West Coast trips left. And you say, well, how good can they be? And what will the travel be? And I know Harbaugh was the one that brought up the London thing last week. He said, you were the guys that brought it up or whatever. I mean, they were the ones that opted to play. They played well enough. They got back. They got rested. I mean, I don't know where the complaint would be this week in regard to the organization of the offense, other than how did you lose that game to Pittsburgh? How did you lose that game to Indianapolis? Because what we saw out there on Sunday was certainly as good as promised for months and months and months. And to think that schedule, travel, home, away, I don't know. I don't think that had any effect on Pittsburgh or Indianapolis or any of that. I would like to think the first month was more about injuries in practice and, guys not really being ready to play around the league because they don't play in August. They don't. Like, we're into football season now, and you're starting to see what the Chiefs look like. You're starting to see, sadly, what the Bills look like to some degree, or what the better teams are supposed to be. The Chargers, like, pretend, and then other teams that have fallen from grace in a big way, like Packers, Raiders, watching really bad teams. But the Ravens have a schedule here that feels like keeping guys healthy. There's just a ton of winnable football games in their front. They really are. I mean, there's no reason, as like the Orioles, we said back in May or June, hey, they're going to be a playoff team for real. Like, not there's no reason to think this team isn't playing in January.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really thinking that even before Sunday's win. I mean, this has looked like a playoff team from the beginning. Now,
but you're 3-2, and if you lose to the upstart Lions, all of a sudden 3-3's,
they're 4-2.
4-2, excuse me, 4-3 is a whole different place than thinking about 5-2 and coming off a win where I don't know if they're going to be at the top of everybody's power rankings, and I make fun of that all the time.
Right.
But that is the way we measure. We don't measure these teams by 5-2 or 6-1. We measure them by, if the Ravens had to go play the Eagles this week, how would they look? Well, they look pretty good against the Lions. If they had to go play the Chiefs this week, which they don't, or the Bills, which they can't. So they only get what they get in front of them. And you say, well, if you can beat the Lions that handily, you might be the best team in the NFL.
Maybe, sure. I mean, I guess the point I was trying to make is there's a difference in this league between being a playoff team, which the Ravens look like a playoff team through the first 6 weeks, and being in the top shelf in terms of legitimate, serious Super Bowl contenders. That was the point I was trying to make, where, if you want to be in the same breath as Kansas City, and beyond that in the AFC, who knows? Because as you pointed out, I mean, Buffalo's looked great certain games, and other games they've looked like, well, how they looked against the Patriots on Sunday, or how they looked against
But it
the
took
Jets
the Ravens 7 weeks to look great, I guess is what I'm saying, to look as great as they could look, where you say, well, they were injured. They didn't have half their players on the field last month. It was, I dare I say, preseason. I use that analogy. I mean, it feels like the season turned on Sunday, because you're talking about elite teams in the league. I don't know if people were talking about that at 11 o'clock on Sunday. I think you're talking about the Lions being more elite than the Ravens in regard to how they looked for the body of work through the first 6 weeks of the season. And the Ravens went out in less than an hour by 2 o'clock. You looked at the Ravens and thought, okay, yeah, they're a cut above the rest of the league when they can turn it on. And as I wrote in my column, is Harbaugh gets you get 5 press conferences a week with Harbaugh, and every one we're working to get better, we're going to be better, we're going to be better, we're working to be better. It doesn't mention injuries, it doesn't mention the offense. Like we're going to be better. Well, Sunday they went out and they did it, and
Yeah.
for that, it buys me a month or two of thinking they can be that good, even if they go out and sleepwalk in Arizona, which, as I wrote, they're going to lose more games. They're going to lose ugly games. They're going to win ugly games. But for one day, we can all look back and say, remember how good they were? Remember what we saw them do against a really good team at home? That's how good they can be. I needed to see that measurement, Luke. I really did. Like, you and I sit here and fight about Lamar, the offense running, Lamar. Like, I need to see it. And I finally saw it this year with this team, with a very healthy as they're going to be. And I'm impressed by it. I stand as impressed by everything they did in the offseason, which I was impressed by, but it wasn't making its way to the field the first month of the season. It really wasn't.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. I mean, I think you could look at the Cincinnati game, but even then, I mean, the Bengals at this point in time, what are they? I mean, they're better than they looked when they were 1-3, but they're still not a team that you're necessarily viewing and saying, hey, that's a Super Bowl contender. I mean, again, to your point, overall for these teams, show me. And I don't think this buys them a month. I think this again, it's a week to week league, and as every time you think someone's building to something, then they're knocked off, right? Or something happens, or you get an injury at this spot. I mean, it really is week to week, and I think yes, you're trying to build to something. Yes, you're trying to be in a position where you're playing your best football in November and December. And you made the point about, I think, what the schedule looks like over the next month or so. Although I'll remind, December and early January doesn't look quite as easy when you look at that. But they are in a position where you can build. You're playing at home a lot over the next month. You get to late November into December, you're going to have a time period where you can rest and you're not going to be playing a lot of football as they'll have their bye week in early December. So it's a late bye, with so much talk about them not having a bye after this
I'd
Sunday.
say
But
that Cleveland-Cincinnati 4-day period of time, that's as significant as they're going to have in the
yeah,
season in regard to the division and taking care of their own business in the division. Because you don't think the Steelers are coming to get you till they take 50,000 people out to LA and win. You don't think the Browns are coming to get you until, they win. And they're not 1-5. You know what I mean? They're still
yeah,
hanging around, and they still have what they believe is a punch against the Ravens. I would say this: bring any version of the Bengals to Baltimore you want. If the Ravens can go out, and I sound like Harbaugh now. If the Ravens can go out and play like they did on Sunday, they'll beat anybody. They'll beat
yeah,
anybody.
yeah. I mean, that's what you want to see. You can't, and that's why for me it was getting tiresome to hear. Well, they should be 6-0. They should be 6-0 until you play like a team that you would think of as a 6-0 team, which is what we saw on Sunday. Then that rings hollow. As I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, to me over the last few years, and I don't even say this to be disparaging. It's just the reality of where they've been the last few years. I mean, they're the ultimate shoulda, woulda, coulda team of the NFL over the last 2 or 3 years because of injuries to Lamar, injuries elsewhere. This run of inexplicable losses where they've snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, they've been that team where you would say, okay, they're good, but can you really buy into them as better than that? Can you buy into them as playing in deep January? Can you buy into them going to a Super Bowl, winning a Super Bowl? In the last few years, because of what I just laid out, they haven't been convincing in that way. You could try to talk yourself into it, but going out Sunday, beating a high quality opponent. And I still think the Detroit Lions are going to be one of the better teams in the NFC. I still fully believe they're going to be a playoff team. So it happens. Kyle Van Noy even laid that out post game. He said, look, I've been on the other end of some of those, and don't think for a minute that team stinks or that they're fraudulent or anything like that. It does happen sometimes. And we've seen that over the years. So, that is what it is, but it's really a compliment to the Ravens because, again, it's tough to talk about, well, your schedule should be this, or it's tough to talk about, we think we can be a great offense, or we think we can be a Super Bowl contender if you're not going out there and putting together some really complete performances like that. And again, this notion, let's be clear, this doesn't mean that anyone should be expecting them to do this to this magnitude, to this degree every single week, because that's not how the NFL works. But it was good to see that. And as you said, the Ravens needed to show that, especially on the heels of such choppy performances offensively. Even the defense, which statistically had been among the very best in the NFL, let's consider who they had gone up against to this point. Rookie quarterback, Joe Burrow on one leg, Gardner Minshew, a backup quarterback, a third string rookie quarterback in Cleveland now as things have played out. Pittsburgh with the offensive limitations they've had. Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill, and then Malik Willis coming in after him. It hasn't exactly been a murderer's row of opposing offenses, opposing quarterbacks. So even the defense, as much as the focus is on the offense, when you score 4 touchdowns on your first 4 possessions, the defense made a serious statement that, okay, we're not just a good statistical defense. Go take a look at what we did against a Lions offense that everyone's talked about their coordinator being a future head coach, Jared Goff. Say what you want about his history. He was playing like a top 5 quarterback going into this game. All these skill position players, a really good offensive line. Well, we sacked Jared Goff 5 times. We picked him off. We held them without a first down until midway through the second quarter. It's a pretty impressive statement from the Ravens defense as well. So again, just a complete performance, dominating effort from start to finish. As you said it at the beginning of our conversation, there's only so much you can say, so many different ways you could say, wow, that was outstanding. That was excellent. That was really impressive. That's what the Baltimore Ravens were on Sunday. So what it means moving forward, not a whole lot other than you've seen them do this now. It's not, well, we were really dominant in the second quarter against Cleveland, or, well, we beat the Bengals, even though Joe Burrow and their offense wasn't really right in week 2. No, there's no caveat here. They were dominant against a team that a lot of people were tabbing to be maybe the best in the NFC, although certainly Philadelphia and San Francisco would have something to say about that. But certainly a team that was right there with them. And for the Ravens to do what they did, really, really impressive. And I think the other thing that I just chuckled in watching Lamar Jackson play at the level that he did on Sunday. And again, he wasn't alone. He'd be the first to tell you that. Offensive line was great. Wide receivers made plays. Running backs made plays. Tight ends made plays, with Mark Andrews, of course, having a great day. But it was one of those days that you kind of take a step back and you look around at so many of the teams around the league with quarterback deficiencies, so many teams around the league who, and I don't want to get into it all again, that we talked about for months and months and months, but showed no interest in pursuing Lamar Jackson. And then you see a day like Sunday and you see what he did, and you see what so many of these other inept quarterbacks, quite frankly, couldn't do on Sunday. And you just kind of chuckle and you say, this was one of those days where it's a reminder that Lamar Jackson or any other quarterback that you want to throw into the top tier or the top 2 tiers or whatever you want to, however you want to classify it. It's a day where, now he reminds you of why you make the investment you do, and you put the pieces around him that you did, and you bring in Todd Monken. That's what you want it to look like, or that's what you want it to be able to look like at its absolute very best. We saw the Ravens play their absolute very best football on Sunday, and it was really, really impressive.
Lucas here. It's such a choppy league in September, right? Because they don't practice, and Harbaugh, if I was still allowed to talk to John, because I'm not allowed to talk to John, but if I could talk to John about this, John's whole offseason thing is we don't get enough practice. We don't have our players in. We're not prepared to play. Then in August, some guy like Dobbins wants to hold out. We don't get to look at what we're going to, or other guys are hurt. I mean, Humphrey was hurt. We didn't get to see even what's on the field. We're not going to play him in the games that people pay for, so you don't get to see it then. So you see it against the Houston Texans, and even when you get the schedule out, you look at the Houston, you're like, all right, Houston Texans, Indianapolis Colts, all these teams that picked in the top 5, right? Like, you're not going to be tested against them, and you better damn sight not lose to the Colts. You better not lose to Kenny Pickett, whoever that is from Big Ben's gone. You better not lose to those games. And then it feels like for September for so many of these teams, and that goes for Kansas City losing to Detroit, the first game of the season on kickoff. That goes for how bad the Bills have looked at various points, or how good teams have made the Jets backup quarterback look like, or any of these upsets that are out there. I do feel like the league, in all these years of covering and all the years the Ravens have been here, it's changed since, I want to say, the plague, maybe even before then, where these September games, now that they've added a game, and eventually they'll get to 18 games. They just will. They're not going to do 17 forever. That's a ruse, and a scheduling problem as well. They'll get them one more game in Mexico City and Frankfurt and London and all the stuff they want to do when they get the 18th game. But once they add another game, it'll probably level this thing out to be like the season kind of starts in October, kind of like ice hockey. Starts around Christmas. First 15, 20 games don't really matter. I don't want to say they don't matter. They matter in regard to the standings, but you cannot put your best football team on the field in September in most cases. And if you do, by December, they won't be the best team anymore, because if you're out there playing that way, it's such a long season. And to see them round in, I'm thinking about this differently, Luke, as a 55-year-old. My expectations the next 10 years for the league will be, what I see in September, it's like watching an April baseball team. It's a little bit of an indicator, but it really is spring training. We never felt that way about 16 games. Can't give them away. Can't lose that game to the Colts. Can't lose that game to the Steelers. Everybody's sort of sleepwalking in September to some degree, figuring out their parts and what they're going to do. It is nice that the Ravens found a day in the middle of October. Other than Dobbins, they pretty much got everybody on the field, right? I mean, there's a question about Humphrey and his illness before the game, but like a full complement, other than Dobbins, of the players. Gus is running, Ricard's running. They got the kid Mitchell running, Anthony Mitchell's kid, Keaton Mitchell's running. All the wide receivers are out there. All of them are involved. Lamar doesn't look gimpy, doesn't look like Joe Burrow, doesn't look injured. Ronnie Stanley's out there looking and talking like Marshall Yanda. It was a full complement of the team to go out there and play. I think that's what makes it so heartening, is they got everybody on the field, and it looked as good as they wanted it to look.
Yeah, I mean, especially on the offense. Now, defensively, Marcus Williams wasn't out there, although the way Geno Stone continues to play, as I even wrote late last week, that's starting to remind me a little bit of when Chuck Clark stepped in for Tony Jefferson 4 years ago. And suddenly you're like, wait a second, you already had this guy in-house, and you see how he's played. I mean, it's been really impressive. But you're right. I mean, save for a couple guys, and it's not as, and we even talked about this back in week 3, week 4, week 5. The saving grace when you had all those injuries was what? It's not as though all these guys are lost for the season. So can you just weather the storm? Can you get through? Can you keep yourself afloat? Don't be in a position where you lose 3 out of 4, 4 in a row, or something crazy like that, which again, the schedule didn't set up that it was going to be that big of a bear for them, even if they were playing on the road. But now they've weathered that. They have gotten healthier. You knock on wood, cross your fingers, say a little prayer, whatever you want to do to hope that good health continues, or at least not, that it doesn't turn to an extreme the other way again. But yeah, I think you look at this team right now and you're feeling good about it. And your point's well taken, but at the same time, I mean, everyone's in the same boat. I mean, everyone, even the teams that are playing their starters in the preseason, is anyone really doing it so much that you're coming out crisp and polished in week 1, week 2, week 3? Not really. That and it's probably been that way all along to some degree. It's just more magnified now because you have teams that are saying, nope, we're not putting our starters out there at all. So it is a little more magnified, but it's a week to week league. You had 16 data points. Now you have 17, and it really is all along has been, the goal should be that you're playing your best football come November and December. Now that doesn't mean you go 2-7 to lead up to that point. You obviously have to do work early in the season to maintain, to stay within striking distance. But if you do that and you stay relatively healthy, and if you're building and you have a group that buys into what you're doing, and there's conviction in what you're doing as a coaching staff, chances are you're going to be rewarded for that. And I think we're starting to see that, or at least you hope this is the start of really seeing that. So again, go out to Arizona, you try to play a good football game. Are they going to win 38-6 again? I'm guessing probably not. And that's with not thinking very highly about the Arizona Cardinals whatsoever. It's just how the league works. But you try to focus and compartmentalize and keep your eyes on the task at hand every week. And you look up in December and you hope you're in position. And I think this is a team that, now being 5-2 has put themselves in really good position over the first 7 weeks of the season, as we're now in late October. And, you just want to keep going, keep rolling. And you pointed out the stretch that's coming up in a few weeks where, they're going to be home against Seattle and then Cleveland and Cincinnati. And those Cleveland and Cincinnati home games are going to be within 5 days of one another. So they'll have an advantage of playing those games at home, but certainly that's going to be an important stretch for them. So, it never stops. You're never at a point where you say, okay, they've arrived.
Well, you do
despite the
for a
fact that
day.
people
Come
from the
on now.
outside will
Monday
say
morning
that.
they arrived, at least this week, Felt like they
Yeah,
arrived at
well,
4
but
o'clock when
that's
you're
why.
sitting in the press conference.
Oh no, let me be clear. It was wildly impressive. My point is that's very fleeting if you allow yourself to get caught up in that. If you start smelling yourself, right? I mean, and that's what, to me, that's what was so impressive about that 2019 team, that it was right around this time of year when they started hitting their stride, and then they just boat race teams week after week after week, and that went on until they were knocked off in the divisional round by Tennessee. I mean, that's how impressive they did that for the better part of 3 months. It's really difficult to do that, and I'm not even suggesting that this team is about to go on that kind of a run, but when you do it once and you do it against a quality opponent, which I still believe Detroit is at the end of the day, then that you take some heart in that. And I think even for the players and the coaches, it gives them some validation. And they're not going to say this publicly because you know how coach speak and player speak is in terms of talking to the media and putting those things out there publicly. But I think for all of those guys in that room, to a man, there was definitely a sense of, all right, we've talked about this, we've believed in it, we put in the work, going back to OTAs. It felt good to go out there and do that across the board, to not just win, to not just beat a quality opponent, but demolish them, quite frankly. I mean, that's what they did on Sunday. So I think that's how can that not give you some confidence moving forward? But again, it can be very fleeting if you allow it to be. That's why you enjoy it, you move on, get yourself right physically, and you turn the page. You really do. As much as we make fun of those cliches, it's really how it has to work. The best teams are able to do that. You're not too satisfied with yourself. And that's why I was kind of impressed with how Lamar Jackson, his demeanor after the game. Harbaugh even joked about it a little bit that, Lamar's not even all that happy. And, he lamented some of they were very few, but he lamented some of the mistakes they made. He lamented the fumbled handoff between him and Justice Hill, which looked like for a moment, if Detroit was going to have any semblance of trying to get back into that game, that was their pathway. If they had scored a touchdown at the end of the first half, they get the ball to start the second half, they score a touchdown again, suddenly, it would have been a 2-score game at that point. But, obviously it didn't work out that way. But you had a quarterback who didn't seem satisfied. It was much more like, hey, this is what I expected us to be. This is what I wanted us to be. And, to have your quarterback, kind of set that kind of tone after the game, I think that bodes well for this team moving on from this performance and trying to do it again here next week and the week after that and the week after that.
Out to the desert here this week. You'll get some best of this week, as well as some relevant conversation as the Ravens head out to Arizona. We'll be watching baseball all week. You can find Luke at Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net, as well as myself on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, social media. Anywhere I go, you'll be going along with us, including the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, presented by the Maryland Lottery, in conjunction with our friends at Window Nation, as well as Jiffy Lube. And our friends at Hollywood Casino have installed the Ravens. I thought it would be a 10-point favorite, 9-point favorite on the road out in Arizona. I bet that thing will bleed up to 10 because ain't nobody betting Arizona, especially after seeing Lamar boat race the Lions on Sunday. Luke and I talking more football around here. It's a big week. Halloween week for our friends at the Maryland Lottery as well. I'm Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.